So real quick, we're going to let everybody introduce themselves and kind of say what they're up to in these respective spaces. And then we're going to dive into questions and find the intersections of everything and how it's all kind of playing out in these all three of these super fast paced spaces. So we will start the introductions with the Palo Santo Fund team. If you guys want to take it from there.
Yeah, I'll take it away. I think my business partner Dan Lennon's going to hop in here in a second, just dealing through tech difficulties. But great to meet everyone. We are the Palo Santo Fund, so we are a pure play psychedelic focused VC fund. We cover the full spectrum from biotech to clinics to services tech, and even some CPG in there. We made a recent investment in Guella, but we really cover all of psychedelia, as they say, and are very bullish on the growth of the space for a lot of macro reasons. I think the second pandemic after COVID is without a doubt the mental health crisis, and we're here to try to solve that in any way we can, whether that is through a recreational model, whether that's through a biotech model, or in my opinion, I think both can live in some sort of symbiosis here. So hopefully that gives some nice background. I come from more of a healthcare background, so my bent is certainly more biotech and evaluating deals through a life sciences lens. Dan Lennon has been in the cannabis space before and probably has more of a recreational or CPG or that type of lens, and he brings that expertise. So we've really got a pretty well-rounded team here, and I think can lend some nice perspectives.
Chris, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. I'm Chris Vaughn, the CEO of a company called the PCH Group. We own and operate a handful of businesses, but the more well-known ones are MJ, which is a retail and delivery platform in the cannabis space, as well as Saucy, which is one of the larger convenience and alcohol marketplaces around the country for last mile logistics and delivery.
Amen. Amen. And finally, last but not least, Laura, why don't you tell us what you're up to at Prima?
Hey, I'm Laurel Myers. I'm one of the founders and CEO of Prima. We are a wellness brand focused on solutions for skin, body, and mind, really targeting stress relief at the core. And one of our core functional ingredients is hemp CBD that we are using in every one of our products. I too come from the CPG space. That's definitely my background and my perspective. We are one of the leading brands in the sector and can be found at a lot of major retail distributors like Sephora. We've got a big one coming up in about 4 days that I can't say, but it'll be nationwide brick and mortar. So really exciting to see the industry start to gain some mainstream traction.
Dan, feel free to say hi real quick before we jump in and everything.
Hey guys, my name is Dan Lennon. I have been a cannabis investor and now an investor in mental health focused companies over the last 5 years. I'm also building a company in the meditation and mindfulness space. But happy to be here, happy to talk about how the intersection of both cannabis and psychedelics intersect with e-commerce.
Amen. Amen. So this first question, this one's for all of you, and then we'll kind of take it down different paths from there. But each of these respective spaces is very new. When did you first feel safe entering them without fear of legal repercussion? And whoever wants to go first, feel free.
I'd say I felt like the kind of turning moment in cannabis was like 2014, 2015 timeframe. There was a Obama era initiative to basically defund the federal government from enforcing cannabis. The Robacher Amendment and the Cole Memorandum followed the Robacher Amendment, but that, like, those coming out kind of put this legal framework in place that if you were in a state that had medicinal legal laws and the framework that matched the Cole Memorandum, that you felt fairly safe. But I can tell you the banking system and as relating to e-commerce, like being able to market safely without getting accounts shut down, we're still not all the way there yet, but it kind of opened up the window for investors to come into the space in a more serious way than prior to that, those frameworks being put in place.
I think from a brand standpoint, focused specifically on hemp CBD, which was always our goal, was the 2018 Farm Bill, which very overtly legalized the farming and cultivation of hemp and all of its byproducts. There's still a lot of ambiguity, which has put the industry in a pretty challenging position as it pertains to things like payment processors, advertising, a lot of the things that you need to make your e-commerce work really efficiently and really well. It's been improving, but it's definitely not without its challenges still today.
Chris, feel free to weigh in if you want.
I'd reiterate what Dan said. I think, fortunately, this industry's had years of trailblazers that came way before anything that we're working on, and we're willing to take, place bold bets and stick their neck out for an industry that they believed in, and they brought it to fruition. You think of even just the last 12 months with, things like Amazon no longer drug testing employees and putting their weight behind potential legalization, or Apple allowing apps into the App Store. I mean, you're getting huge private sector sign-offs on the momentum this industry is having. But I agree with Dan. 2014 through sort of 16 was this gap in time, or at least for me personally, it said, okay, the long fight of you could be in a legal state, but are there going to be a ton of repercussions for you or not, really seemed to be headed in one succinct direction. You'd be okay operating in the industry, and then it was going to the question of, do you want to? For a lot of employees and a lot of hires, right? I'm jumping out of a well-known company, or I'm moving from Facebook, or I'm moving for whatever. Like, do I want to come into that space? And that was kind of the next big wave of honestly recruiting talent to the sector, and everything else was not without its challenges. But from a timing perspective, many before us, braver souls. But 2014 through 16, we got really serious about looking at the sector.
Amen. What would you guys say with, you all transitioned from other spaces. What was the most effective lesson you brought from each space, and what was the hardest one learned?
I mean, I would say coming through, like, as an investor investing in like traditional consumer tech businesses, coming to cannabis, I think we may have underestimated the hurdles to growth for a lot of these, a lot of businesses that like paralleled what we saw in kind of like traditional consumer tech. Call it like Postmates, the Postmates for pot model, or a digital first consumer brand in CBD. I think we probably underestimated the challenges in kind of customer acquisition in terms of what it meant to not be able to use traditional digital marketing channels, or even payment processing services. So those have certainly been barriers to growth, and speed to growth. But at the same time, the consumers who want it, the consumer demand is out there. So it's more of a matching problem than it is and finding those consumers and getting them in front of the right brands than it really is it's not a demand problem. It's a how do you reach them? And that was probably a problem that we underestimated as investors, and I feel like a lot of operators probably underestimated that too, in terms of being able to get in front of their customers in the ways that they knew how to from previous business experience that they had.
Does it ever feel like the psychedelic investment bubble is moving at a much faster pace than the cannabis bubble did, despite maybe the regulatory aspects not being at the same pace yet, but generally on that vibe?
I would say it's a totally different problem set. Everything we're investing in out of Palo Santo that's in the psychedelic pharma space is going through FDA channels. It's more of a, call it, pharma investment approach than a consumer investment approach. There's really not, we haven't had the Cole memorandum moment in call it consumer psychedelics that cannabis has. the industry's, approaching this more from a mental health and pharma perspective than it's approaching it from a let's legalize it, like medically legalize it at the state level, and then recreationally legalize it at the state level path. So we're not seeing the type of deal flow that we invested in cannabis. We're not seeing that in I'd say that there are people who are trying to start businesses that will then become the marketplace for legalized psychedelics on the recreational side. But I wouldn't say that's like very credible deal flow at this point. It's a totally different problem set. So the momentum that you're seeing is because there's a huge unmet need in mental health for treating everything from PTSD, trauma, anxiety, depression, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, traumatic brain injury. There's a huge unmet need and like a leveling up of the standard of care that needs to happen. And investors like our fund and traditional like biopharma investors are starting to really pay attention to psychedelics or other psychoactive substances that could be very useful therapies in kind of changing that toolkit of how we treat those mental health cause issues.
Laura or Chris, feel free to take that question.
Yeah, I think, to Dan's point, the challenges in terms of growth marketing, customer acquisition, some of the things you just take for granted in terms of an e-commerce platform, payment processors, things that in a non-cannabis sector you don't even think twice about when you're building your business. I think we're a huge learning curve, and knowing how to create risk mitigation within that and have backup upon backup upon backup so that no matter what, you don't have interruption to business and you can continue to operate. I think that was a huge learning lesson coming over to this sector. Certainly in terms of lessons learned in the CPG space applied here that are really important, it's quality. Quality is so critical, and applying those best practices in terms of the standards for consumer products to this sector was really missing. And so that's definitely the approach that we took when it came to product development, production, supply chain, manufacturing, is having really, really strong policies and SOPs in place and standards and requirements, because it was and still is in many ways a Wild West, right? And nobody's really overseeing that. Nobody's really cracking down on that. And it leads to unsafe products for consumers, which then leads to bad experiences and adverse health effects, and just brings the whole industry down.
No, for sure. Like, one of the questions, of course, I had for you was like, how do you as a brand specifically like separate yourself from like the, Mongolian distillate at 7-Eleven,
Absolutely. Well, I think for us, we talk about our products in a very different way. We actually don't lead with the fact that we're CBD. So we're a wellness brand, and that's one of our core functional ingredients. And I think in some ways, by taking a slight step back and having a bigger perspective, it does create a little bit of space, but also educating on the importance of batch records and quality. And here's what we do, and here's why we do it, and here's where you can find that information, so that there's a level of trust. I think trust comes with transparency and accountability. And as a brand, over communicating on that for your consumer is absolutely critical to creating that trust and that separation between what's happening with a lot of the crummy product out there on market.
Amen. And Chris, feel free to speak to that challenges thing, or also I would love to get in with you about just how important direct to consumer delivery is going to be for the cannabis as a whole in what's to come.
Sure. Quick on challenges. Yeah, I think going into the industry, we knew there would be a lot of brain damage. We spent 8+ years and bringing alcohol into a delivery format, which had not really been done before in most states. And so we spent a lot of time on the regulatory front, a lot of time with different government agencies and government bodies in different states, figuring out how you can do this compliantly. And so I think going into cannabis, we knew it would just be brain damage times 10. And I think our team was prepared for that. And that's kind of what we're known for being willing to go through. And I think it's been a shock to some other people. I think what was crazy to me is you have a lot of assumptions on who the cannabis consumer is, or different segments of cannabis consumer. And you saw so many bets being placed as to it's going to be this, or I'm building for that, whether it was on the brand side or at retail or at even tools and services to the industry, or where the most value in the industry would be created. And at the end of the day, I think the biggest learning and takeaway from that, which is a lot of what we talk about internally as a company and as a platform, is building something that has flexibility and is defensible, and different business units can protect other business units, if you will. You know, what I mean by that is you saw brands that were branded for one very particular type of consumer. Call it, you know, the term was always the Chardonnay mom, right? And that's going to be this massive untapped market that has never been in cannabis before. And if we create beautiful products for this new consumer, we'll win. That didn't pan out. Anybody that pursued that outright didn't pan out as well as they thought. You saw a ripple effect into retail. You saw very different types of retailers, shops that were very like legacy customer oriented. You literally walk in, the only thing on any label is THC percentage. I know shops that will not carry any product with under 25% THC. They just won't even buy it. You know, they're going after a very specific demo and customer. And then there were shops that were beautifully designed. Honestly, things that I thought would be winners, a place where I would go buy cannabis. And you've seen some of those stores struggle tremendously with sales. And I think the balance that if I was to zoom out in the industry, one of the biggest things is keeping an open mind, always be willing to accept that your assumptions are incorrect, and ideally building a platform or a structure where you can adapt quickly. I think that's all part of bringing an industry out of prohibition effectively and into a legal state. There's going to be so many twists and turns along the way, and so many places where there's value here one day and then value there the next day. It's been fascinating to watch, but the people have not been able to be nimble. Most of them are either gone now or really struggling, and it's been a big focus at the company, and something in most companies, you know, being agile and things like that are important, but not to this degree. That's what I'd say.
All right.
Wholeheartedly support
Oh, go
that.
ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, I really support that insight on being able to be nimble, because things are changing so quickly. Consumer demand is changing, right? Everything that's happening right now with Delta 8 has taken what was primarily a broad spectrum demand market to now isolate, right? And it's being able to be flexible and nimble to respond to the changes is critical for survival.
Amen.
Yep.
So on to the next one. Tim, I was going to say to you, how much do you think this psychedelic progress is going to happen? You know, we talk about entourage effect, but how much is the progress going to happen one molecule at a time?
Yeah, I mean, to Dan's earlier point, since we're seeing 95% of psychedelic deal flow fall in this biopharma camp, and some people having companies emerge in anticipation of a potential recreational market, albeit that's a lot riskier. If you're doing it via a biopharma route, you're probably going to have isolated compounds. There's a lot of discussion of the entourage effect. I know that comes from cannabis. If you can have a multitude of compounds that all may in aggregate contribute to the therapeutic
All the other
effect.
stuff on the frog's back.
Exactly. Yeah. Bufotenine, bufo, all that stuff. So for psychedelics, I think the big thing is if you're taking something through an FDA clinical trial, the FDA likes to see isolated variables. So the moment, even if you have a combo product, I mean, we've seen that in CNS drug discovery. For example, Symbyax is a combination of an antipsychotic with an antidepressant. You'll have to run a multi-way clinical trial to assess the effect of both isolated compounds and then both of them together and see, is any one alone explaining the therapeutic benefit, or is it really both of them acting in concert? So an issue you run into is you're taking these through trials. If you have a bunch of different compounds in a mixture, then you have to do a multi-way trial here. It gets very prohibitively expensive when clinical trials are already a very expensive endeavor in the space. So that's one reason. The other is the FDA likes to see GMP grade product as well. So they want to know every time someone's getting their medicine. Think about it if you're taking, medicine for back pain or opiates or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're getting something consistent, because if you get your dosing wrong, you can die in the pharma world. Now with psychedelics, we know that's not the case, but the FDA is applying that same level of caution. So at least in a biotech context, I don't see a lot in the way of the entourage effect. If a recreational market opens up, I'm sure you're going to see a lot of discussion around there maybe being a benefit there, or in the Oregon model where there's going to be oversight, and you'll really see this in a therapeutic context. So it's not recreational like cannabis. There you could see usage of raw mushrooms, since we know these are not lethal. But aside from that, I don't see a lot of focus on, multi-way compounds or fixed dose combos, as we'll call them, in the life sciences realm.
With a lot of these new types of markets, a lot of times they exist because of the work of advocacy organizations kind of moving the change before there's any money to be made whatsoever. Would you say in the psychedelic space, MAPS kind of played that role similar to how Normal and MPP did in the weed space?
Yeah, I think Rick Doblin was a genius at MAPS, both for the drug he used, the indication he went after, the fact that it ties so closely to veterans, and that immediately made it a bipartisan cause. So I think, yes, MAPS, USONA, Psychedelic Science Funders Collaborative, all have really paved the way in so many ways of holding the torch throughout the decades here. Another group too that I don't think gets spoken about enough is the academics, who really led the charge on psychedelic research. Dave Nichols, Chuck Nichols, who's an advisor to Palo Santo, folks like that. Yeah, Matthew Baggett, all those names. Sasha Shulgin operating more in the underground, but they really held the torch on psychedelic chemistry and pharmacology when it was a dead end for their career. Chuck Nichols will tell you, when he was going into this field, his dad was like, you're probably going to kill your career here. You're shooting yourself in the foot. But they did it anyway for passion for the industry. But I do think a lot of credit goes to those folks, and MAPS is a great Trojan horse, I think, to encourage broader acceptance of all these substances, and also show us that they're not nearly as scary as people thought they were during the Reagan era. So once you take it through a clinical trial, you show that it really isn't toxic, at least in the dosing you anticipate, and there is tremendous therapeutic efficacy, and that's proven through a double-blind placebo trial. That's pretty incontrovertible proof of the therapeutic value for these. So I think that holds a lot of, so it's a lot less hearsay as to what really is effective and what isn't. So MAPS has definitely been a trailblazer.
Excellent. All right, on to another group lightning round. Whoever wants to take this first, feel free. What is the main regulatory hurdle of the moment for you, besides weed banking? Sorry, guys.
I'll take that one for us. It's the FDA and their current perspective on hemp, CBD, and dietary supplements and foods. That's been a huge challenge and really frustrating. A lot of businesses and lobby groups have tried to change their perspective, but because there's not clear federal regulations and there's so many different agencies involved, it's led to every state taking their own regulatory framework, which has made it very difficult for retailers who are operating in multiple states to have a clear point of view and clear risk tolerances. So 100% FDA's lack of clarity and or willingness to kind of draw a line in the sand.
I think for us, it goes back to a question that you asked a minute ago that I didn't get a chance to answer, but it is around just delivery regulation. I think that, I said it on a call earlier today, and the person thought I was crazy, but I think that if you're a state that does not take delivery regulations seriously, then you aren't serious about legalization in this industry. I think if you think of how the majority of the illicit market purchases, it's via effectively delivery services, right? It's calling dealers and having them show up or meet them or whatever it may be. In most markets, it's not trap shops or local shops. It's either that or growing plants yourself or whatever it may be. And I think that if you're in a market like New York, the big mistake that a lot of states are taking is they treat delivery licenses as just sort of this like afterthought. Okay, we got to figure out cultivation, we got to figure out something around distro, we got to figure out something around retail, and then delivery is this like little segment that they tend to just throw out honestly as, we'll use that for a social equity segment, or we'll use that as something that will give a few regions, or we'll do whatever it is. But they're not introducing laws that allow for competitive delivery operations to really come in and operate. And I think if you consider what's probably one of the number one ways you're going to transfer a lot of purchases out of the illicit market into the legal market, well, if you're going to tax the product heavily so that the legal sale is almost twice the price, then one of the biggest levers you have of getting that customer is convenience. Yeah, it's a little bit more expensive if I order it legally, but man, that was just so easy. That was so easy. Showed up to my house, friendly service, great driver. And so I think that a lot of these states that are thinking about delivery regulation, or they have not made it legal, or they're thinking about making it legal, but making it so onerous that it's impossible to make money doing it. Like you have to have 2+ drivers in the car, body cameras on everybody, only a single order at a time, like literally pulling out every lever that you have as a delivery service to be efficient, like batching and grouping orders, labor costs, all these things. They are going to meaningfully hinder the transition of their state from illegal cannabis to legal cannabis. And I think that's a big issue. You know, as we talk a lot about being able to bring our model into other states and unlock this plant and this product to the masses, I don't think that states are thinking about how customers purchase products today, and then thinking about how people purchase the majority of cannabis, legal or not, today, and then introducing legislation or laws that unlock a real clear transition path. I do think that California, while they've had their mistakes on the legislative side, has done a good job at introducing competitive regulation for delivery companies to thrive. You know, last year in California, retail sales or sales in California legal cannabis went up 50%. Retailers grew by 2 to 3%. So where did that gap go? You know, you have a lot of municipalities that can't figure out or don't want to figure out, how do I put tons of cannabis shops throughout my town? You know, I don't want, you know, they already are frustrated with how many liquor stores they have, how many tobacco stores they have. They don't want to be trying to pull those back and then turn around and it looks like some streets in Colorado where every other shop is a weed shop. But they recognize that this is something that people want and that people need, and they want tax revenue from it. What's the solution there? Delivery. So, you know, I think one of our biggest restrictions is, as we look at something that's going nationwide, consumers nationwide wanting to adopt this, what happened in 2020 with customers adopting delivery and e-commerce as a channel for purchasing. And then you look at how states are regulating cannabis on a state-by-state basis. They're not thinking of the end consumer first. They're not thinking of how to serve that consumer first. And if they were, they'd be introducing much more competitive delivery laws.
But Tim or Dan, did you want to take that one or two, or I can feel free, because I was go ahead.
Happy to chime in really quickly. I mean, I think it's, you guessed it based on our earlier comments, the FDA is the main regulatory body, and the DEA in some way. I think what's interesting to your initial question, Jimmy, at the start of this conversation of when did you get comfortable with adopting this? What's interesting for our space is legally, we are not in a gray zone. So if you have a DEA research license, you can legally work with and research psychedelic compounds or any scheduled compounds for that matter. So you can do that, take them into clinical trials, you name it, as long as you have the licenses in place. For us, the bigger question is FDA approval. And you're really, some of it, there's a well-trodden path, but when you're dealing with CNS disorders in particular, there's a lot of regulatory caprice there. And, you know, regulators can shut you down because they don't like the endpoints you're using, or it's a lot more murky with CNS disorders where there's not clear biomarkers here. So we really live and die by clinical trials in psychedelics, that going from phase 1 to 2 to 3, drugs fail at each phase and the funnel gets narrower and narrower. So that's really the big milestone for our company. We're not really looking at profitability, revenue, at least in the early days. You're thinking more about a de-risked pipeline. And as you jump from each phase, your odds of approval by the FDA go up. And that's a big milestone in valuation. And then DEA is also a consideration, even when these do commercialize. If you approve a drug, if a drug gets FDA approval, by default, it has to get rescheduled by the DEA. So we saw that with Epidiolex, what GW Pharma did there, which I think that provides a really nice roadmap from the cannabinoid pharma space to psychedelics, what a lot of psychedelic companies are looking to replicate. But also other drugs like Marinol, Syndrose, Xyrem are other compounds. Some were THC derivatives, others Xyrem, sodium oxybate, were compounds that were scheduled by the DEA. A medical use was found. By definition, that's no longer Schedule 1, since Schedule 1 is significant risk of harm to the user, no known medical use case. Both those conditions have to be met. If you find a known medical use case, you have to get rescheduled. So the question for psychedelics becomes, what's scheduling? Is it Schedule 2? Does it go lower? You know, Schedule 2 can still be pretty onerous and is going to carry quite the black box warning and have a lot of protections around it. I mean, we forget that cocaine is Schedule 2. There is a known medical use case of cocaine as a numbing agent. So, but that's still, there's a lot of regulations and laws that criminalize people over use of that. So there are some questions there. How does the DEA react? Is there going to be an abundance of caution mentality, or hopefully they look at the data and see that most psychedelics are very low risk of harm to user and to others when compared to even legal drugs like alcohol. So.
Word. All right, we're gonna get one more question in before we go to you guys watching. If you want to get a question in, shoot me a tweet with it at Jimmy Devine, and I will get to them in a few minutes. But before that, another group question for everybody. In all these respective spaces, you know, a lot of these problems you guys are talking about is something that, you know, the entrepreneurs involved kind of have to be able to craft the solution to. How hard is it to become a stakeholder in these respective spaces, CBD, psychedelics, and cannabis? I'm just trying to craft the future you want to create for yourself.
Jimmy, when you're talking about stakeholder, you're talking about a founder of a
seat at the
company,
table.
bringing something to. I would say, you know, cannabis, in terms of kind of creating a business, I would say the bar is probably significantly lower than it is in psychedelics, mainly because of all the things that Tim was just talking about. That it's, you know, you're right off the bat, you're playing into needing DEA licenses and needing to, you know, basically live up to the standards of clinical trials and, you know, larger pharma companies. So the buy-in and let's call it the team that you need to do that is a lot more advanced than, you know, your average cannabis, you know, dispensary owner or even CBD brand bringing like a consumer product like that to market. That's not to say it's not a worthwhile cause. One of the things from that previous question that you answered, like there's going to be a very interesting intersection between call it the state medicalization, state legalization route of psychedelics and the FDA, you know, federal route. Sometime here in the near future, because you know, decriminalizations of ethnogenic plants or psilocybin or psychedelics is on the ballot of, you know, 200 plus jurisdictions in America right now, and I think we're going to see it. You know, it may not. You know, we're basically at like the 1996, 1997 time of cannabis. It may move quicker than cannabis has over the you know, the last.
Well, there's a lot more money
15, 20 years.
There's a lot more money behind it right off the bat. So
yeah, there you have some of just say some of the best and brightest pools of capital working to help push this agenda in America of decriminalization and medicalization of psychedelics, because I think you know, if you get into the numbers of just where mental health is for a country as a whole, it's pretty dismal, and it's something that certainly needs to change and change in a positive way and change quickly. So, you know, whether it's a difficult, you know, whether it's a harder thing to get a seat at the table or not, I think it's a worthwhile cause. I also think you'll start to see cannabis fall into you know, kind of the call it federal legalization route or medicalization route, like the pharma route, as research around and doing clinical trials around you know, cannabinoids becomes easier. There's been more of a barrier there than there has for. It's honestly harder to do research around any, you know, cannabis-based product than it is around psilocybin, LSD, any other traditional psychedelics, or even new psychedelic compounds. Just structurally, there were a lot more issues to being able to do that type of research because of how it's set up with the DEA. So, but I would say anybody who's looking to get into that industry, anybody there's going to be not just a ton of work done on the clinical trial side, but also on the patient acquisition side, and that's where it intersects with, you know, what we're talking about, you know, what this conference is about, which is e-commerce. we're starting to see the beginnings of that happen with businesses like Mindbloom and some of these other like telehealth and Field Trip, who are out there acquiring patients in the mental health space for mental health condition, underlying mental health conditions, and running them through psychedelics assisted therapy, whether it's in clinic or via telemedicine. So that's, for anybody who's watching this conference who's e-commerce minded, that's kind of like the beginning of where this is being talked about in public and in consumer channels right now. And that's I'd say that's the space to pay most attention to, which is starting with ketamine assisted therapy. You'll start to see patient acquisition and the conversation around mental health kind of start there.
Do you think in the long term there's more value in the therapy SOP than the compounds themselves?
I think we're going to find that compounds are just like many other psychiatric compounds, are individual to an individual's like situation and brain chemistry, and that the therapy around it is going to be even more necessary in any type of psychedelic assisted therapy. So I think you're right, like the protocols like could become more valuable than the actual compounds, but I think they go hand in hand. And if you look at like how MAPS is taking MDMA through clinical trials, how psilocybin's been taken through clinical trials, there's not a lot of like IP protection around the actual compound, and it's really around how the therapy is delivered. So yes, initially I think you're going to see a lot of value created in how the therapy is delivered. But that's not to say that new compounds that you're going to be able to get more IP protection around from a pharma perspective aren't going to come around later that will be valuable compounds as well.
Fantastic. Laurel, or did you want to take that one?
Yeah,
the stakeholder one.
Yeah, I think, look, if you look at the CBD sector, it's pretty clear the barrier to entry is low. I think it's very easy.
Does that make it hard? That's what I'm saying. The noise in the crowd, it must be that much harder to be like, listen to me. I'm not crazy.
Barrier to entry is low, barrier to success is high, right? And I think there's a really big difference around being able to have a product out there and have a product connect with a consumer, right? Going back to what Dan was saying at the beginning of the conversation, there's a huge kind of gap in that demand and the supply and connecting those two things together. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and quieting the noise and helping people sort through kind of what's real and what's not.
Fantastic. And Chris, did you want to weigh in on that, or would move to the audience
Sure.
Q&A?
I mean, I'd say just very briefly that I don't think it's too late. I hear a lot, even the past couple of months, people are like, is it too late to get into one of these industries? Is it too late? Is there too, they're too far gone, et cetera. I like to remind people that think about like Diageo. Diageo is the largest spirits company in the world. They were founded just slightly over 20 years ago. That's a pretty new company, right? Even Southern Wine and Spirits, or Southern Glaciers now, when it was founded, I believe in the 70s, not like right after Prohibition happened. And so while it feels like there's so much activity in these spaces and so much going on and all these new things all the time, and all these companies, doing strategic moves or M&A or funding or things moving out ahead of the pack or not, or whatever it is, we're still in very, very early innings, like very, very, very early. These are 2 or 3 industries that are going to evolve tremendously over the next 100 years. They're some of the fastest growing industries in the world. If you're looking for a career or you're looking for an opportunity to really specialize and grow into something, it is not, trust me, cannabis is not a fad, right? It's a massive industry that's been around for a long time. And you're helping see through the transition to the legal market. That's just the beginning. So can you become a stakeholder? Can you be a part of something interesting, or found something interesting, or invest in something interesting? I think if you look at the growth trajectory alone for these segments is just massive over the next 5, 10, 20 years. There'll be a lot of twists and turns along the way. Like I'm sure, Ford Motor Company came out with the Model T, then all these car companies exploded everywhere. Everyone thought, oh my God, there's no way we could ever get into cars. It's totally saturated. You have new cars coming out later. Toyota came out, Nissan came out more recently, Tesla came out, Rivian came out. Like these are evolutions of a product that's addressing a customer need, and there will always be ways to come into the space.
Word. All right. First question from the audience. It's a good one for LA Ecom Week. How far out do you guys think your products are from being in paid TV placements in TVs and movies? That's a tough one for some of you, I know, but we're having a good time.
I mean, some people were pretty close, right? Like there was some big, retailers and people in cannabis that booked Super Bowl ads 2-3 years ago. Last minute, they got canceled before the Super Bowl aired. I personally think that.
I mean, Chris was on Jimmy Kimmel recently.
We were on
with them
TV recently.
Yeah,
They were. It's small, but it's happening, right? And I think two big moves are going to help accelerate that. One is Apple changing their guidelines on the App Store. I mean, Apple is a massive media company today, right? And if their tone is changing on one side of the spectrum, it could change on others. New York legalizing cannabis, the epicenter of media for the world. It will. Those are two huge shifts that I think have a direct impact on like media advertising, where you can advertise, where you can't advertise. I don't know when it'll unlock a bunch of other channels, but and some of the announcements from Amazon, obviously, is one of the world's largest employers and growing. I think it's in the very near future. And so even as a marketer in these companies, you think, oh, we can't do these types of ads, we can't do those types of ads. I think you need to be preparing. You should be ready that in the very near future, those will be a part of your media matrix.
On the psychedelic side, I think it's coming. We're not that far off from these therapies being commercialized and talked about in mainstream media channels. I mean, I think Nine Perfect Strangers is probably a good example of psychedelics being talked about in kind of in the public realm these days. And there's some other stuff that I know about that's in pre-production, where you're going to see it spoken about in a way that's like healthier than it's been part of the public dialogue in the past. And I think that'll break down the barriers for you starting to see these therapies talked about more kind of widely. I don't know if you'll see product placement, but I think you'll see it be part of the public dialogue in a much more healthy way than it has been over, since the basically everything was kind of shut down and the research was shut down in the 60s.
Do you think the interstate markets, like the pace that we'll see psychedelics open up in the interstate markets, will be a lot faster than the 20 years it's taken weed so far?
I think interstate for cannabis is going to be brutal.
It's going to be mass consolidation, 1,000%.
Or even like shipping product across state lines. Like there's a big, player in California, right? That's wrapping up a ton of cultivation, right? Like millions of square feet of cultivation. And the pitch is around, when it goes federally legal, who's going to be the epicenter of cultivation for this product? Like Michigan, where it's cold all year? No way. California, where you ship like the majority of produce for the nation anyway. It's prime, growing climate. You have more turns per year, all these things. Okay, fine. I hear that. But I mean, you have companies in the space suing states when a state doesn't, approves a license type that they don't like, or whatever it may be, right? You think that when it goes federally legal, all of a sudden people are going to be shipping weed in between state lines all over the country without like
They
mass
already are,
carnage?
though. Isn't the argument that the man wants to get its piece if it's happening anyway?
Yes, but it's not so much I think the man would say, okay, it's federally legal, you can do what you want. I think you're going to have a handful of companies and states all start going through a brutal legal process of like suing each other and trying to block each other. Like if I'm an MSO and I have like 500,000 square feet of cultivation in some state where it's not great to grow and my quality of product is pretty poor, but I get to sell at like $3,000 a pound right now, and then all of a sudden it opens up and California can sell weed that's 2-3 times better than mine out here, I'm dead unless I block that or figure out a way to stop it, right? And so a lot of this game is
Isn't
know,
that
right
part
now,
of capitalism too, though? Like to grow the finest quality, product
all I'm
possible, just
saying
'cause
is
you buy
I
5
think
million
it'll be
square feet.
a more of a brutal slog when that happens between private sector and states trying to protect interests. Then I don't think it'll go, hey, it's federal, and then everyone will play nice with each other. Like I heard rumors that trim in New Jersey is selling for $900 a pound right now. In California, high quality trim can be selling for $10, and I bet you it's better quality than what's in New Jersey. So how do those dynamics play out? Like, right? It'll be interesting how interstate commerce works.
Amen. All right. Well, I got the warning. I think that's a wrap for us. I super appreciate you guys taking part. And if anyone wants to hit up any of the panelists or some of the best in the game, and I highly recommend it.